Creating and describing fantasy races is a crucial aspect to world building in your story. These unique races can add depth and diversity to your fictional world. In this guide, we will cover everything you need to know about creating your very own fantasy race. We're going to start with the first step, which is defining the purpose of this race. You don't want to just have a race just to have a race. There must be a reason. Such as orcs are usually the threat to another race or a village. That's their purpose in the story. It's to cause trouble. Elves, their purpose is usually to have like the knowledge of aeons past and like have magical abilities. Humans, their purpose is usually just to go on adventures to talk to either one of those two races. But for you, you want to create your very own race. So that's why we're here today. First off, of course, you have to just simply decide if another race is necessary. Say if you have a race of iguanas, beavers, and otters, and if they all have a specific purpose, do you need to have a raccoon race? Right? Like, what will it add to the story? If you're just putting them there to like add to the ever-growing list, there's not really any point. So just make sure that there's a purpose, and we'll continue going on. The first thing to do is conceptualize the basics. Consider their physical features like size, shape, and color, their lifespan, like long-lived or short-lived, and natural abilities like magic, enhanced senses, or physical strength. And then you have to decide if they're going to be humanoid, as in, somewhat, as in looking something like a human, or radically different, like say a raccoon, right? That would not be a humanoid, but an elf or an orc would be a humanoid because they somewhat look like a human. So once we answer those questions, such as physical features, lifespan, abilities, and whether they, will look like a human or not, we'll continue to the next one, which is cultural diversity. Say if your orcs act exactly like elves, it's going to be very hard to distinguish why they can't all just be elves or why they just can't all be orcs. You have to show your reader that all of this world building is for a reason. You don't want to just waste their time. So, diversifying the culture, making each culture of each race very different from the other, is a great way to do this. You want to define their customs, traditions, social structures, and belief systems. Really, I think each race should have some sort of either religion or folklore to truly craft the rest of their world, but we'll get into that later. And then you also want to think about how these cultures are going to affect other races. Say, like the orcs. If their culture is cannibalism, then once they run out of people, or once they run out of orcs to eat, they're going to go find some people, right? That's going to affect the human race because of an orc culture or tradition. Now, going back to what I was talking about with a unique religion, you also want to create unique origins. Now, these can either be true or they can be myths. It's entirely up to you. In a fantasy story, it's totally likely that elves popped out of an egg laid by the giant chicken in the sky, if you want it to be. Or that can be the myth that they tell each other since the dawn of their civilization. No one can really know where they came from. But as the writer, that's your choice. These origin stories can explain their existence, their relationships with deities, or their role in the world's history. They can also influence their cultural values. So now going back to my example with the elves popping out of a chicken egg, we could have the elves' monthly sacrifice to the sun chicken, or whatever, to show how this origin story has shaped their culture for hundreds of years. That's one of the main ways how this origin story can affect what they do now. Or say for the orcs, their orc god, or like the father of all orcs, could have eaten all the other siblings, so then he started that race. That then gives precedent for the other orcs to follow the tradition of eating other orcs and other beings. Now, step 5 is language and writing. Now, do I suggest making an entire language for a fantasy race? No, I do not. However, having some sort of flavor to the naming of certain locations belonging to this race or the names of beings in this race. You could have like all the cities of the elves end with door. So like Silver Door, Leaf Door, something like that, that shows how this language that we don't totally know about, that you nor the reader knows about, crafts how they name locations. The same thing can be for naming characters, such as say if all the orcs end with meat, right? Really bad example, but we could have like Ekmeat or Jean-Meat. This can help us show that there is some sort of language going on, even if we don't want to take all the time to craft one ourselves. This brings us to step 6. Now we have their origin story, what they look like, their language, if they have one, Now we have to go into habitats and territories. Like, where do they live? Where do they hunt? Where do they fight? Consider the geography, climate, and resources that influence their habitat choices. Think about how their habitats impact their lifestyles and architecture. So say the orcs, right? They don't have any hair on them. They're just kind of like green and just a bunch of skin. They would probably want to live in a warmer climate, maybe a desert. Now, with that being said, the desert wouldn't really give a lot of room for either stone or wood to build houses with. So they'd have to resolve to either clay or just maybe using a bunch of hides to create teepees from the animals that they hunt there. And then you also have to kind of decide on what animals these humanoid races, or any race really, is going to hunt. So once we know more about their habitats and territories, then we can go into their history and evolution. Now, you don't have to go super in depth with this. However, just like how we have an origin story, we should have some sort of story telling how and why they are the race that they are now. Say if all the orcs are in hiding, or if they're just like all divided up, there has to be a reason for that. Now we know that is probably because of cannibalism. They just kind of keep to themselves. But the reader won't know that until you give them history as to like how the orc father, ate his siblings, and then gave the orcs, their civilization, and then they just continued on that tradition in honor of him. You'd have to show them that somehow by the history, and then show how that tradition evolved into something that really broke up the entire civilization because everyone was attacking each other. And now, say another example could be with the elves. We could show their history of how they were birthed by an egg in the sky, and then how they developed themselves into these magic bearers who can craft beautiful architecture in these forests. That could be their habitat, forest, because they have to have all this wood to make these buildings. So once we have the history figured out, we have a good sense of their nature. This leads us to figuring out how they are going to interact with other races. Going back to step one, which was why we even need these races in the first place, we also have to make sure that these races are not just insignificant to the other ones. So, for example, orcs would obviously not be very friendly with elves, and dwarves the same way. But humans and elves, they might get along. It all depends on how you want to structure it. Now, these three races that I just named, dwarves, orcs, and elves, I'm not saying that you should use them. This whole guide is about you making your very own races. So that's what we're going to do. I'm just using these as examples because I don't know what you're trying to create. So you would explore alliances, trade, conflicts, and prejudices. Now, trade could be how the orcs hunt in the desert. Maybe there's like this really cool, I don't know, giant scorpion that's like really tender meat, that has really tender meat. They might sell that to the humans, even though they don't really like them. And the humans would buy it off of them, so that would be trade. But then they'd always think, like, man, they're kind of smelly. I don't really like doing business with them, even though they give us the scorpion meat. That would be like a prejudice against all orcs. So there's kind of like that uneasy balance between them. And then the dwarves could come in, allying with the elves, to maybe drive the orcs out of the desert. That would be an alliance. To validate these prejudices and alliances between these races, it's a good idea to have a shared history of all of these races combined. Like, what did they do together? What did they do against each other? And stuff like that. Now, this brings us to tip 9, which is character archetypes. Now, you'll notice that most elves are wise, most orcs are just like angry, and most dwarves are also quite angry, but also short and angry. These are almost character archetypes. You want to identify the common characteristics of these races so that you can have a better understanding of how their history would form and how they would engage with others. While not all individuals have to conform to this archetype, this can provide the readers and you with initial expectations. Now, another thing that you could do is subvert these stereotypes. So, say you're orcs. They could be instead like just bakers and really friendly, while the elves are the evil ones. You could subvert it like that, which really creates two different races than what you first began with. That's another thing too. You don't necessarily have to create a whole nother race. You can just take the races that are already existing and put your own spin on them. So now that we know a bit more about their archetypes, or hopefully you do at least, I have no clue what kind of race you're crafting, but you have an idea of what their archetype is going to be. Next, we're going to go into physical appearance. Now, we already covered like how tall they will be, what color, and such like that. But now would be the place to detail the physical characteristics of each race, including their height, builds, skin tone, hair, eyes, and any unique features like wings, such as like for fairies, horns for minotaurs, or tails for like cat people. I don't know. The nice thing about having a description for your race is that it'll make it easier to describe each character in that race. Some you'll just have to say what's different about them, such as they had green eyes instead of the usual blue, or their tail was a bit longer than others, or their tail is striped, or their horns were pointy compared to the other minotaurs. With this physical appearance, we can also go into clothing and adornments. A clothing style is extremely important for creating a consistent race. As I was saying before, the orcs, since they can't really farm any cotton or really have any sheep, they probably just wear hides. While, say, the elves might make their clothing out of leaves from the trees if they live in a forest. The humans, well, they might grow crops, which would allow them to have cotton and such. You have to take into account their lifestyle, if they're hunters, foragers, or farmers, and then also where they are, sea, desert, forest, mountains, just plains. All these things can have a huge effect on the clothing. Some clothing might also reflect the cultures and traditions of these people. Say the elves, hatching from that egg. They might wear headdresses with eggs hanging from them. It really doesn't matter to me. I'm just giving you examples on how traditions and cultures can have an effect on what they wear. Now you really have a basic understanding of what your race is, what they're doing, what they're going to do, where they were, who they're friends with, who they're enemies with, where they live. All those things are answered now. So now you have to design a social structure for them. Will they be a council led by elders? Will they just have one warlord chief? Looking at the orcs right now, I'm sure that they wouldn't really have a council to decide things. Their clan would probably just have a chief. While, say, the elves would have a council of elders, and perhaps the humans would have a king along with a parliament. These social structures should stem from their habitat, cultures, and traditions, just like their clothing. Next, we'll dive a bit deeper into their philosophies, their values, their beliefs. You have to consider their views on nature, spirituality, family, and societal responsibilities. These beliefs can influence their decisions and conflicts. So elves, since they live in the woods, would probably have a deeper connection to nature than, say, the orcs who live in the desert. Perhaps the humans, who have probably a lot more children than elves or orcs, would have a higher value on family. Their values and beliefs are shaped by who they are, what they are, where they are, and what they do. So just keep that all in mind when you're designing your beliefs. Say orcs would probably not really value family a whole lot, considering that they're, basically God ate his siblings. So family would be very low on their list compared to high on humans, or societal responsibilities. Maybe it's the dwarves wanting to take care of nature up top, so that's why they live underground. I'm just making these examples up as I go, so bear with me if I get a little random at times. Now, another thing that you can do is get visual representations using say AI art. I do have a great guide on this. You can check my profile for it. It's crafting character descriptions with Midjourney and Verb. You can skip to the Midjourney part so that you can learn how you can craft these character illustrations or portraits using descriptions. It's a great way to get an idea of what your readers might think your race looks like. And this brings us to the end of this guide. Hopefully you found it very helpful. I tried to shove as much as I could inside of this guide as possible, while also trying to keep it short to be respectful of your time. I know that we're all writers, we're busy writing, we don't have time to watch these videos. Now, since you finished this entire video, you're probably very interested in creating your own story. That's where I come in. I can personally coach you, helping you write each chapter, helping you craft your world, map your story, world build, craft these races with you, and much more. If you don't know where to start with your first chapter, don't worry, I can also help you just get the ball rolling by helping you write your first sentences. I highly suggest booking a call with me down below, going through that link. It'll be a totally free coaching session with me. We'll cover anything that you want. Whatever you need help with, we'll get right into and start getting you on your writing journey as soon as possible. It'll be about 30 minutes to an hour. Again, totally free, no strings attached. Book a call with me and we can see what we can do. I hope you enjoyed this guide. If you did, please like and subscribe if you will. I'll see you in the next one.